In this discussion with colleagues, Dr. Ford describes his recent session with 18-year-old Jaylen, who was recently moved from juvenile detention to adult prison for charges on murder and grand theft. Dr. Ford's been meeting with Jaylen for several months, but due to external administrative decisions with which Dr. Ford did not agree, but which he was required to respect, Dr. Ford is being transferred to another prison clinic. We learn that Dr. Ford's session unfolds with the usual handshake with Jaylen, who then begins to share a repeated dream about his mother visiting him in prison. His mom was killed and found by Jaylen when he was just 10, and he's confused by why she's in this dream. When Dr. Ford asks Jaylen about a personal memory of his mother, Jaylen shares how she would take him out for ice cream at the start and close of each school year. We also learn that Jaylen has a toddler son, Jade, and an ex-girlfriend, Liliana, who is Jade's mom. There's a discussion of a possible connection for Jaylen between Jade and the grandmother he never met. We learn Jaylen is serving time for having killed a man during a carjacking. What's remarkable is that after Jaylen escaped the scene in the car, once he discovered there was a baby in the back seat, he turned around and returned the child to the crime scene, resulting in his arrest. When asked why, Jaylen tells Dr. Ford that it was simply the right thing to do. Dr. Ford shares how Jaylen showed emotional vulnerability and self-reflection within this final session, revealing a great level of trust. He also talks about his struggle handling a dual awareness as a therapist, wanting to both encourage Jaylen's therapeutic engagement and growth, while also preparing Jaylen for the bad news about the therapy ending. After learning this news of Dr. Ford's leaving, Jaylen challenges him, pressing him on why he won't take the right path and continue with Jaylen's treatment, just as he'd chosen the right path by returning the child during his crime and despite the consequences.
Dr. Ford, thank you for giving us the opportunity to know more about your case, and thank you for your time. Michael, Steve, Keith, thank you so much for being here. Your case seems like, oh my goodness, I'm just thinking about it. It has so many layers and so many complications. But Julian, before we move on to our wonderful colleagues, who I'm sure have a lot to say, I'm wondering, how are you doing right now after you share the case?
Well, thank you, Rocio. I'm not doing fine in the effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional sense, although I might be a little bit of the emotional. But
makes sense.
No, I really feel deeply affected by this because I really hate to have done this to this young man. And in some ways I realize I didn't do it to him, but in other ways I feel like I did.
Yeah.
And he feels like I did. And that's legitimate on his part, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess the toughest thing for me right now is just reconciling. He told me the truth that if I wanted him to stand up for what was right and take the right path in his life, how is it that I'm willing to then just basically say, okay, I'll go along with whatever I'm told to do and leave him behind?
I'm sure you didn't go alone, but sometimes we have to do what we need to do. So it's just important to realize that. But
Yes.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Julian?
Well, so thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm emotional by what you had to share. So it's a very great question to check in with how you're doing. You talked a little bit about, before we get to kind of this piece about that decision, which I think we'll get into that, about some of the dreams. And I'm not an expert on the dreams, but I was curious when you started talking about the ice cream and started to say, well, is there something more to that than just, your mom giving you ice cream at the beginning of the school year and at the end? What just sort of, it sounded like it was remarkable that you were able to probe that a little bit more, but what clinical hunch did you have to say, well, I want to explore this just a little bit more? I think it's more than just a good mom giving you ice cream significantly at the beginning and the end of the school year.
The ice cream was not an ice cream only.
No. Sometimes ice cream is just ice cream.
Sometimes it is.
In this case,
But this case not. And I'm just wondering, it sounds really great. I'm just wondering what made you decide to do that?
That's a great question, Steve. And what I was thinking was, I want a way to help this young man to connect to having been seen and cared for and loved by his mother in a way that it will stay with him and that resonates with him. And I thought, well, I didn't know what memories he was going to have, but I had a feeling that he would have memories where there was something that happened where his mother showed him how much she cared for him, and also how, in this case, how proud she was of him. I didn't think proud to begin with.
Sure.
It was a possibility.
Yeah.
So the reason I focused on it was because I thought this is a way for him to go back and do some memory processing, but not trauma memory processing. This is more the kind of restorative memory where he could then actually literally see his mother in his memory as she saw him when she was taking him out for the ice cream. And if, over time, if we'd been able to continue, I would have wanted to explore that and maybe even, help him to kind of zero in on, what was the look on her face? Was she frowning and saying, "Oh, I got to take this kid for ice cream. I don't really want to do this. This is boring," or was she, what did you see in her face?
Yep.
So thank you. That's why I felt that this would really be a good way for him to see himself in the mirror, but with his mother and how she looked at him and how she responded to him as the mirror.
Yeah.
In a way,
Yeah.
I think about a ritual, right? Like you said,
And that is
it starts in the school day, the school year, and then the first day of school and the last day of school. And what a beautiful ritual that this mom sort of shared with him, and the contact of the ice cream, and and you had done also ritual, Julian, just sharing with us that you shook his hands at the beginning of the session and at the end of the session.
Yes.
What an amazing gift too, because it was actually the consistency, right? And the contact. Oftentimes, we all long for those connections and those physical touches that are healthy touches, and that, especially kids in the juvenile justice system, they don't have too much physical contact.
Physical
Healthy
contact
physical contact. So
is highly
that's right.
Concerning, because it can be dangerous, unfortunately.
So how did you started shaking hands with him? Like, what motivated you to do that?
Well, it wasn't just with Jaylen. This is something I would do with every young man who I work with. And I think it's important as you say, because of the ritual, but I also think it's important because in the moment when we're shaking hands, it's sort of like the moment where he was sharing the ice cream with his mom. Two things are happening. Number one, it's the recognition that this is a person who actually views me as having some worth. And it's not words, so we don't get into any of the stuff that's not worth that much, but it's literally contact. And when you shake hands, when I shake hands with these young men, I can see do they look at me? Do they not look at me? If they do look at me, what's the look on their face? Does this change over time as we continue to meet? Is it different on one session and that kind of tells me what the weather is, the emotional weather is at that point in time. So it gives me a lot of information, but I'm particularly interested in what it shows them. And I think it also, and this relates to the ritual with his mom, that his mom was obviously brilliant, and she was telling him basically in between this time, first day of school, which is often anxiety-provoking, last day of school, which is like, oh, whew, I made it, and maybe even some accomplishments, that in between this time, he'll have that sense of her presence, because he'll always know that there'll be that ice cream on the last day. So he knows she's with him at the beginning, and he knows that he'll be with her and she'll be with him at the end and throughout. And so to me, that's from an attachment framework. He's now developing a working model of security. And I think the handshake can then be a way of kind of providing that for some of the young men and women who have never had it, But for others, it's a way of kind of reviving that sense when they have had some of that in some of their primary relationships.
Oh,
I know
that's
the two
so
of you want
nice.
to jump in here, but just one more thing about the handshake, because I do think it's significant, and that is you're also giving him, or your other clients as well, a choice. You can
Yes.
choose to shake your hand, you can choose to shake it firmly.
Yes.
Because you're like, "Oh, whatever, I'm just,
Yeah.
you can choose to not shake it.
That's a
Yeah.
great
So
point.
you're sticking out your hand. I'm always going to be here for you.
Yeah.
You can choose to accept that offering or
Right.
not, but it's going to be there at all times. That I think is pretty significant because now he
Yes.
has some authority in how he's
you,
deciding
Steve.
if he wants to or not.
Yeah, I
That
hadn't
you
thought about it
gave
that
him
way.
some of that authority, as
Yeah.
opposed, no, you're going to shake my hand. We're not going to start until you do,
Right.
right? Because
Exactly.
right, and
This
you
is how
didn't
we
do- you don't
start.
do that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because I'm sure we'll get into this a little more. But it sounds like in many ways, Julian, the session started like other sessions,
Exactly.
that you had.
Yes.
And what I also heard is a lot of loss.
Yeah.
And can you talk to us about the choice that you made not to bring up the separation and the loss until the middle or towards the end of the session, as opposed to knowing that he'd experienced so many losses prior, and huge impact obviously on you and him, as well, to have to deal with that in the moment. But I would love to hear a little bit more of, you kind of know this about him and the choice of not starting the session with that, to give you the entire session to see where that space was going to navigate versus in the middle of the session.
Great question.
Yeah, and that really was one of my primary questions in the session and continues to be. And the way I thought about it, Keith, was that given all the losses that this young man has experienced, and the fact that this will be another loss, even though he will not want to acknowledge it, and I understand that as well, because it's so painful, that I thought it would be really important to create a context, briefly as possible, a context where, rather than what he heard was, okay, you sit down with the doc and he tells you, sorry, this is
There
our
we go.
last session,
Yeah.
boom, we're done. How do you feel about that? And like, I would never ask that anyway. Not a good question. But I thought it was really important for him to have the experience, the lived, immediate physical experience of us talking together about whatever it was that was most important to him right at that particular moment. And I had no idea that it would be a dream. We've talked in the past, we talked about situations where what was on his mind was that he was worried about his son, because his son was kind of, at times, as described by his son's mother, it might be accurate, maybe not, kind of boisterous, and maybe a little bit of a behavior problem. And so he was worried, oh no, is my son now starting to turn out like me or like our family, my brothers? So I didn't know what he was going to bring in, but I thought no matter what he brought in, my goal in this was to give him a clear message based on what he had to tell me, not just giving a message directly, about how I see him. And the person who I see underneath the layers of defensive armor that he's had to put on because of all of his life experiences and his current life experience. So that's why I thought it would be important, even though I knew it would probably make it harder for him in some ways to get the news, rather than just, quick, let's just give the shot and get it over with.
See where it goes.
Yeah. And so that was my concern too, that, should I have just told him that and not tried to kind of buffer the impact? Michael, what are you
And
going
I
to say?
appreciate Keith's point of, it's a grief session. That's the session you had. And my thought on that, because it sounds like one of your core questions, Julian, is did I do the kind of the quote unquote the right thing by waiting till the middle? Maybe I should have brought up at the beginning, or maybe sooner. And so I'm gonna just CBT you right now and best friend you, which is,
okay.
let's say Keith was your supervisor. Keith is a phenomenal clinician. I am sitting next to phenomenal clinicians. And so, but let's say Keith did that. You saw the same session. What would your feedback be for Keith? Would you say, wow, you messed up, Keith. You should have brought it in about minute 5. Why'd you talk about the ice cream? I know you wouldn't say this, but like, what would your feedback be to Keith seeing that session as a supervisor if it was switched out? You were observing him work with Jaylen, and he did the same moves you did. What would you tell him?
I wouldn't tell him anything. I'd ask him exactly the same question that Keith asked me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't answer that for him.
Yeah. And what if Keith said, man,
But does that mean I don't get an answer?
yeah, well, what if Keith said, man, I should have talked earlier. I should have started session with like saying I'm leaving. And that was, that was kind of a punch. How would you respond to Keith?
I would say you're probably right. That was one of the things that I thought about. And to me, the most important thing in all of this for Jaylen, as well as just in general, or for any of the young people who I work with, is I think it's important that I be a role model for them about thinking through the choices. Not necessarily making the right choices, because sometimes it's just not possible to know what's the right choice or not. And that's what does help my heart rate to kind of go down, and a little bit of respiratory sinus input to kind of come back to, okay, I don't think there was a right or wrong choice here.
Listen, termination, especially unexpected termination, is never going to be easy. If you had done it at the beginning, I think you're spot on. You're like, well, then what are we talking for? Or you could have said, well, we're together for another 50 minutes. You might as well talk what you want to talk about. If you did it at the end,
right, yeah.
then it's like, oh, and by the way, I'm not going to be coming next week. So I felt like you allowed some of the process and some intention at the beginning, because there were some elements you wanted to talk about.
And it sounds like, Julian, you were also trying to, make sure that you were leaving him with a lot of things that you have seen throughout the sessions,
Exactly.
of his strengths, of the things that, he's doing well. And at times I see that all of us have sort of cases where we knew that maybe that first session or that 5th session or 10th session was the last session without even saying it, right? Because, our clients sometimes they never come back.
True.
And, like
Each session could be the last
session can
one.
be the last one. And, in each session, it's almost like, what do I leave my client with that can be worthwhile for him to hold on if I don't have any opportunity to?
Great
So
point.
could we expand on that,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Because I think for me, first of all, I want to acknowledge that the frustration of the system, transferring you with no notice. Like, it's just, we know that this is a problem for clients, right? When they experience
It's
this,
not
and
trauma-informed
we
services.
know it's the exact opposite of trauma-informed care, right?
Yeah.
And you have no control over that, as well. And it sounds like that you were feeling that lack of control for yourself.
Absolutely.
And you were seeing and feeling and actually seeing right in front of you the impact that this is having on the client.
There was some parallel processing going on.
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe the question is less, when do you bring this up and when was the best time to do that? But we have an opportunity to maybe think about, how do we create a transition for him to that next clinician, right? Because the next clinician is set up for a tough road right now,
Right.
given this experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now that you've been let down by one who you thought you could trust, why would you trust anyone?
Why should I trust anyone else? And it sounds like there was really great work that was happening with this
Definitely.
client as well. And I might be going out on a limb here, but the way you described just the theme of attorney, but also maybe what Jaylen experienced in the loss of his mother and the immobilization that he might have felt at that time, and just the inability for him to have that transition with his mom.
Yeah.
Because it was sudden, unexpected.
It was sudden and unexpected, and this
horrifying.
This has perpetuated that sudden and unexpected. So is there something that we can do to create a transition for him? Is there a letter
point.
that you can write consolidating your sort of thoughts and perspectives, you know, on the treatment. Is there something to transfer the case to the next clinician?
That's
you know,
a good
so
thought.
Yes.
there's some sort of continuity, and you know, so you're not forgotten, and that there's a continuation of what you were trying to consolidate for him at the end of the session.
Wonderful point.
Interesting possibility. There is no plan for a transition, unfortunately. I think there always should be.
Yeah.
But this is one of those cases where it's just, sorry, you got to stop because you got to move on. And no, we don't have another available clinician right now. And we'll see, we'll certainly do our best. So of course I advocated for that very strongly.
Sure.
But there was no way that I could get a definite commitment. And I think it was important that I did what I could in advocating. So that at least I left a clear record, and I left that in the chart too, that this is a young man who was at a point where he really was benefiting from therapy, he was participating, he's motivated. He may seem like he's not motivated because of the defenses that he has, but that he actually is a very good candidate for continued therapy and should be considered as such,
Sure, yeah.
and not just basically left aside because I got transferred. But I also think that the letter idea, I don't know if I will be permitted to leave something for him. But you know what I'm going to do? I might be able to, but even if I can't, I really appreciate that idea, Keith, and I'm going to write a letter to him.
Nice.
And it may be a letter that never gets sent.
May actually be just as helpful for you in gaining some closure
Oh,
around the
yeah.
case.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. You know, I can't tell you, I mean, I don't recommend this to every client, but when there is that kind of lack of closure and a need to find a way to bridge that, I don't hesitate to suggest as one option that kind of a letter that may never be sent. So yeah, that's really a great point, and I will definitely take that to heart.
The thoughts going through my head, Julian, and I love that idea, Keith. I think it's a great idea. Is and I'm going to not speak from a PhD perspective, from lived experience, like someone with a crap ton of trauma, and I remember everyone who hurt me. I remember them all. I also remember the ones not who helped me, but who tried, because I can count them on one hand in 18 years. And I think, like Keith said, like Steve said, we are buffeted by the systems. It's one of the most cruel systems in existence out there. It's a no-win situation in what we do, and it's just getting worse. And so I feel free on that just as a person. But there's a deep power. I think I just have to believe this as someone with lived experience. There's a deep power in the trying. And did you leave them with like that experience? And because not now, definitely not now, but I have to believe at some point Jaylen will say, you know what, Dr. J, man, he was good, man. He tried, they didn't let him help me. Like, JJ didn't let him, the penal said, like, because they didn't. And but there's a deep power, because I remember all the people who tried. They didn't, they couldn't. There was no possibility. The system wouldn't let them, the state wouldn't let them, like the doctors wouldn't let them, the probation, they just wouldn't let them help us. And they left us there to fucking rot. And you didn't, and you're the it's kind of like you're his black swan. Is that you're the exception. You only need one to disprove that hypothesis. Like all swans are white. Like all these people don't give a shit. No one cares about me. But there's going to be because he sounds like a smart kid. There'll be something in his head that's going to click like this, that Dr. J doesn't fucking fit. And it's going to bug him, and it's going to bother him. And it sounds like he's smart enough to at some point click, yeah, Dr. J, he gave a shit, man. And if he can, then I can.
Wow, thank you, Michael. That's really helpful. And I don't remember again, because the session was so emotional, I don't think I looked all that emotional in the session. I hope not. I mean, I certainly wanted to convey to Jaylen that I really regretted this. But beyond that, I didn't want him worrying about me or having to feel like he had to give me any sympathy, which would have been really a burden. But I think at some point in the session, I intended to basically tell him, and I don't remember if I used these words, that just as he heard his his mother's voice around the corner. I think I said, maybe there'll be a corner and you'll find me around that corner. If that's possible, I hope that will happen, because I think at one point he said, "You'll never see me again." I said, "I hope I will," because I truly do hope I will. And occasionally I have encountered some of these young people.
Yeah.
And that's such a gift, because whatever has happened in their lives, just to know that they even remember anything about our contact together. But especially if it's something where he takes away the idea that this is a person who truly does believe in him. And that I firmly agree with you. I think that's something that many young people never hear, that there is somebody in the world who believes in them. And again, I don't want to be schmaltzy, and I don't want to be phony or just talking the talk, but that was one of my goals in this session, for Jaylen to hear very directly why I believe in him also. Not just, okay, I think you're a good person because everybody's a good person and I want everybody to feel good about themselves, but no, because he cares that much about his mother. He cares that much about his son. He went back for that baby. I know there are other ways that we didn't talk about in this session, but I know he's looked out for his younger brother. He's a young man who really, truly has some wonderful, remarkable strengths and values. And I just wanted him to hear that very clearly, even though I knew that probably he was going to have a hard time believing me at that point in time.
Well, and I wonder if in many ways this could be his most memorable session, because you're, because you're laying out all of those
That's
things
a
and
good
those
point,
wonderful
Steve.
things,
I
and
thought
yet
about that.
you're merging that with this, and he let you know how he felt. It sounds like,
Oh yeah,
not
I've
shaking your
never
hand.
seen that much feeling from this young man.
Right.
Well, I've seen it, but I've never seen it expressed so clearly and outwardly.
So to Michael's point, I think that he will hear you around that corner or in a dream or some way.
And he may curse me out.
And he may, but what's wrong with that, right?
Nothing. Nothing. I'm actually, when he was getting really mad at me in the session, I was very uncomfortable, and I did not want that. I would never be pushing for that at all. But I truly understood it, and and of course the silver lining is that, that showed me how much he cared.
Oh yeah.
But the one thing I tried to tell him, I don't know if I succeeded, so maybe someday I'll figure this out, is that it's how much he showed me that he cares is not a sign of my importance. It's a sign of who he is, that he has that capacity to care that much. And I pointed out the ways in which he shows that caring that are pro-social, okay? But I also see them in ways where it looks like he's just an angry young man, but he's not.
Well,
he's a very caring young man.
He is, and he does have that capacity, but you did give him the space to be able to understand some of that capacity and to reflect on that in a healthy environment. Now we use safe spaces all the time. Is it safe? Is it brave? Is it courageous space? Whatever term you want to use. Yes, it was about him, but we like to be humble in these situations.
I see.
But he was able to do that because you provided an opportunity for him to do that. And I imagine, had this been your first session, that's not who you would have seen. So I imagine it took a while for that relationship, which is why he reacted the way, because if he didn't have that, I'm like, okay, I'll just have the next one. I mean, so what? I don't really get to know you anyways.
And we need to wrap up.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Steve.
Yeah.
And by the way, I won't pull a young man on you and say, I don't know what you're talking about. It's really it wasn't me at all. No, thank you. I hear that, and that's why I'm still doing this work.
Excellent, excellent. So if before we wrap up, what are you left with? If you just pick one word about our conversation that you wanted to leave with Julian, what would it be? Who would like to go first? Just one word.
Choice.
Choice.
Thank you.
Significance.
Significance.
Connection.
Connection. For me, it's hope. Thank you so much, Dr. Ford. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. And thank you, my colleagues and friends.
Absolutely.
Thank you.